Tonight's speaker is new to Springfield College, but is an old friend of Springfield College in a whole lot of ways that you'll hear about tonight. He and his organization, Courts for Kids, connects local communities around the world and brings groups together to build community basketball courts and to provide service to humanity that benefits spirit, mind, and body. Rather than giving him a long introduction, I'm instead going to give time for him to talk about his organization and projects. I will turn the microphone over to Derek Nesland. I want to let you know that if you are inspired or interested in Courts for Kids, on your way out, there are clipboards where you can sign up to get more information and find out about the possibility of being involved yourself in a Courts for Kids project. It doesn't commit you to anything, but will allow you that opportunity. So without further ado, let's please welcome Derek Nesland.
Thank you, Judy. It's great to be here with you guys. I just wanted to thank everyone who's helped host me. Charlene showed me around today very graciously, so thank you for that. And thank you for setting this entire thing up. It's been really, really cool to be here. I just got in, but I feel like this is kind of a homecoming in a way, just because of the impact that this place has had in terms of basketball. I mean, this is where it all began, right? And I kind of knew that, but being here has been a little bit of an emotional experience for me because basketball has done so much in my life. I wanted to read, I don't know if you guys have all seen this little history book. Yeah? There's a little quote in here that I just read where James Naismith remembers walking across the gym floor one day and seeing a boy toss the ball toward the basket, recover it, and toss it again. An hour later, as he came back through the gym, the same boy was still at his plate. For some time, I tried to discover what there was about goal throwing that would keep a boy at it for an hour. I stopped and asked him why he was practicing so long. The boy answered that he did not know, that he'd just like to see if he could make the basket every time he threw the ball. So here's this little kid shooting the basket over and over and over again for an hour. And when I read that, I was like, that's me. That's me. When I was in the 4th grade, I remember really clearly having a piece of paper at my house that had, during the summertime, I divided it by days, how many hours I was going to play each day. And this wasn't something that came from my parents or a coach, but it was just something that I had this drive. And so I remember my goal was to play for 4 hours a day in the summertime. And so if my parents went away, then I would come back and play the next day for 8 hours if I was gone. And I remember I faithfully did this. I was kind of insane, I think, looking back on it. And it wasn't just shooting. I had this strict routine that I would do. And so basketball from a young age was such a huge part of my life. And then I remember going into high school, I remember thinking, I heard someone say, if you get a girlfriend, your basketball game will suffer. So I remember I didn't want to get a girlfriend, but I think the reality is I was about 6'5", 140 pounds. I looked more like a baby giraffe at that point in my life, I think. So that might have just been an excuse. But then that kind of carried me forward in my life, is this love for basketball. To this day, I don't know if we have any Boston Celtics fans in the room, but Larry Bird with angel wings is the top of our Christmas tree top there. If that gives you any idea. And one of the things that I found most interesting, I think, about being here was how quickly the game of basketball spread. I'm sure you guys all know this, but I didn't really understand the extent of how quickly it went from 1891, being here, to just being around the world through the YMCA network. And I wrote down, by 1893, I know it was in France, at their YMCA, which is now the world's oldest original basketball court. Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Russia. In 1894, it was in Brazil. 1895, China, Australia, Philippines. So within 4 years, it was being played on 5 continents, which is just insane to think about that, right? And so in a way, that's kind of what we're doing, is continuing that journey that was started all those years ago. And so I'm going to talk, and actually, I think Judy alluded to this. Let's see here. But we did do one collaborative effort back in 2012. Judy actually went on this project to Uganda, to northern Uganda, and they brought one of the original bricks, you can see it up there, from the original YMCA building, and it's placed in a basketball court in northern Uganda, which I think is super cool. So I'm going to share what we do, but I thought showing a video to introduce it might give you some visuals about what it is that we actually do, and then I'm going to tell you kind of the story of how it all began.
We're going to Morocco. We're headed to Paris right now. This is our plan.
We're here in Morocco, building an all-purpose court with courts for kids.
For this project, the kids have been helping shovel sand and rocks and bring it over to the mixer, in which we would make the concrete.
We wheelbarrow the cement to wherever the contractors need it, and then they lay the cement.
We generally work during the night because it's currently Ramadan. It's the month that Muhammad would have received the prophecy that is the Quran. So for the whole month of Ramadan, they don't eat or drink anything during the day. So we're working at night in order to honor that.
My favorite part of this trip has definitely been just getting to spend time with the people of Morocco and the locals, and kind of getting to dive deep within another culture, getting to experience something new, things that I'm not really used to, out of my comfort zone, both good and bad.
My favorite part of the trip has been interacting with all the kids and seeing all the way the kids are so independent over here.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to come to Morocco because I was able to immerse myself in another culture and learn about people that are different from myself, but also learn that we're not so different, and also be able to work within the community with members, with children, really small, and with older members of the community, and be able to build something that will last for generations.
I've learned about myself that I was very sheltered back home, and that now here is made me work harder, made me appreciate the little things that I have back home more.
One thing I learned about myself is I'm just open to do a lot of new things that I never thought I would be able to do.
I've been able to appreciate how kind and how serving members of this community are, and I've been able to appreciate the little things at home for themselves.
I'm so thankful that I got this opportunity to come with all these awesome athletes, and we all come from different backgrounds.
My favorite part of this experience was getting to build this court with all the kids in the community together.
We will benefit from this court as members of the community. So the kids will play here. We don't have here a lot of places where to play football or basketball or volleyball, and this multi-sports course will help people to play, and we are so grateful and thankful.
We are very great to welcome this team of Texas and the association of courts for kids who have done really a good job here in the commune of 13 in Morocco, and we are very grateful for their hard work.
Definitely once in a lifetime. I don't think that I ever get to really dive into the culture like this just by touring an environment. I think that you don't really get to have these kind of interactions. You don't get to actually live with these people, eat what these people eat, as they eat, how they eat, just do the things that they do, live the way that they live. I mean, the things that I have done here in Morocco and Palestine specifically, I don't think I'd ever be able to experience it anywhere else.
So I didn't mean to advertise University of Texas to you guys, but that was the last trip I was on. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, so I wanted to show you that video to give a little visual about what it is that we do. Last year we sent 30 groups similar to that all around the world. And we're talking about hopefully doing something like that here. I want to just kind of give you a background on my story because it's kind of an unlikely one that I would ever be doing anything remotely close to this. And hopefully after I'm done sharing this, you, wherever you're at in your life, might realize that if I was able to do something small like this, you guys will hopefully be able to accomplish even more. So hopefully this is inspiring to you, because when I was sitting in your position in college, I never could have dreamed that this is what my life would have encompassed. So to start out, when I was born actually in North Dakota, spent a year of my life there in New Salem, North Dakota. So I don't know if they were inspired by Salem, Massachusetts, or what it was, but that's the name of the town, New Salem, and they're famous for one thing, and that's this. Let's see if I can get it here. It's a little bit finicky. This reminds me of a Course for Kids trip right here. How to adapt. All right, what's going on? I gotta get the mouse back over here. Okay, there we go. The world's largest Holstein cow. That's what my hometown is known for. Not significant, but when I moved from there when I was 1 to Southwest Washington, where I live even to this day, the extent, what we do is provide cultural exchanges. The extent of my cultural exchange was going from where I lived to North Dakota every summer, where a lot of my family was. For some people, that might be a cultural exchange, but for me, it wasn't so much. I did take one trip when I was younger to Finland, but that also wasn't really a cultural exchange, because my mom was Finnish, spoke Finnish all the time. We had Finnish relatives coming over all the time, so that was part of my heritage. So I really had zero intercultural history or anything growing up in a pretty homogenous area. And then I was invited when I was similar, are any of you guys freshmen? When I was a freshman in college at Portland State University, I was invited to go play basketball in Bosnia and Croatia. And that was 1997. I didn't really know a lot. Like I said, I'm not the most qualified for this, because I didn't really understand that much about the world at that time. And I didn't know, what I knew about Bosnia and Croatia, actually about Croatia, was that they were probably maybe the best basketball playing country outside of the US. I'm curious, are there any diehard basketball fans that would know in the 90s some famous Croatian basketball players? Anyone? He was not Croatian. He was Serbian. But we'll get to that. Yeah. Anyone remember? Anyone? Did you say Drazen Petrovic? He was one. Tony Kukoc, Dino Raja. These guys were kind of up-and-coming basketball players. So this is kind of what I knew about Croatia. What I didn't really know the extent of was the war that had just ended a year and a half before. Okay, there was a huge war, the Bosnian War. Anyone familiar with this war? So basically, this is the former Yugoslavia. It was a communist state that had all these different ethnic groups that lived within the borders, okay? And Yugoslavia, there was a strongman dictator, his name was Tito, and he basically suppressed the ethnic rivalries, was a strong man, and kind of kept it under strict control, okay? He died in 1980, Soviet Union collapses, 89, and all of a sudden these states want to start becoming independent. So you can see kind of the ethnic makeup and how Bosnia and Herzegovina is really the one country that was just a mix of different ethnicities. So the rest, when they gained their independence, it was more peaceful. But what happened was in the former Yugoslavia, Serbia had a lot of power. They had the prime jobs. And so when Bosnia was splitting, they weren't sure who's going to control this area, what's going to happen to the Serbs. And so there was just massive, massive fighting. If you look at 1991, what it looked like in terms of the ethnic breakdown, you see it was, there were different regions, but at the same time, it was very mixed. And then after I went a year later, in 7 years, this is what it looked like. And if you can imagine to have this sort of level of internal migration, that doesn't happen peacefully. That happened with a lot of bloodshed, a lot of violence. 100,000 people died in this conflict over the period of a couple years. And it was it was the worst conflict in Europe since World War II, okay? And that's where I was headed to, and I was learning about it on the fly. I did know one thing about how basketball connected to it. Raalte, seen right here, Yugoslavia in the 1991 European Championships won, and a Croatian came out with a Croatian flag. Keep in mind, Vlade was trying to preserve Yugoslavia as a nation, and he took the flag and ripped it from his hands. And what it did was he became enemy number one in Croatia. So he and Drazen Petrovic were great friends, and there's an ESPN documentary called Once Brothers that talks all about this. They wouldn't talk for the rest of their lives because of this ethnic tension. So we traveled all around Croatia. We did some projects in these islands over here, not projects, played games in Zagreb. But one place we played games was right on the Croatian-Bosnian border, right there where it's the border is yellow on one side, pink on the other. And it was a town called Slavonski Brod, which looks like this. And it looks like a peaceful town. When we went there, it looked like this. There were UN soldiers everywhere. Buildings were completely shelled. There was a main bridge connecting the two that was just destroyed. It was in the water, and they had a makeshift bridge. And it was a war-torn area. So for me, my dominant memories of that trip were talking to the basketball coach, who was a great guy, played against his team, super hospitable, nice guy. And we brought up the question. Someone asked him if a Serb, or he actually maybe even volunteered this. He said, if a Serb was walking down the streets in our town, I would not hesitate to kill him. Without question. There'd be no question in my mind, I would kill him. And that's what we heard and saw, and so much so that we went up and talked to these UN soldiers, they were American soldiers, at the bridge. And they told us story after story about Croatian police officers coming up to them at night, and they were intoxicated, and they basically were begging the police officers to let them cross over the bridge, kill as many Serbs as they could, and come back to Croatia. And for me, as a 19-year-old, just wide-eyed college student, it rocked my world. Like, my mind just exploded with, wow, this world is a much, much, much bigger place than I ever imagined. And so much so that I remember coming home, and I remember my wife at the time, who was my girlfriend, thought I was going to break up with her because I was like a different person. Like, I was just, I don't know, like, it took me a long time to process what I just experienced. So anyway, but what it did was it planted a seed in me that I wanted to see the world, I wanted to understand the world, and it kind of started fueling that in me. So after I graduated, I had a chance to play on traveling basketball teams. And any chance I could travel, I would. So right after I graduated, I went to China. I played in 2 different tours around, a huge chunk of the Chinese country. And I think at that point, I remember, and by the way, that's not me, in case you're wondering. I played all around China, and I think that's when I started to realize some of the significant cultural differences that exist around the world. And I don't mean language, although those are pretty funny. Some of the translated signs that exist. I wish I had a book just of Chinese signs translated in English. It would be priceless. But what I remember from a cultural standpoint is we'd play our game, and it was in arenas like this one, and it was jam-packed, and we would go for a timeout. We'd come off the bench, and our benches were kind of big, like, bleacher seats. And we'd come off, and we'd go back to sit down, and there'd be a row of Chinese guys sitting in our seats. And so we'd have to, say, hey, this is our bench, can you please? And so instead of leaving, they would turn around, and they would kind of have one cheek on the bench. And so if you looked at our bench, it would be like me, a Chinese guy facing that way. Another one of our players, another Chinese guy facing this way. And so I came to realize that we have very different views of personal space. There's these realities that cultures view things differently. And that fascinated me. And so then, right after that, I had a chance to go to Russia to play. I had a chance to go to Kazakhstan and play. So this was actually, my memory of this was we were in a tournament, and it was the Kazakhstan national team, the Uzbekistan national team, a team from China, and I can't remember who else. And the first game we played, I had the best game of the whole tour. I was our leading scorer. I had a really, really good game. I was hitting everything, and that was against, I think, the Uzbeks. So the next game we were playing the Kazakhs, they were the home team sponsoring this tournament, and I fouled out of that game in 5 minutes. My wife to this day thinks I picked up a foul when I was sitting on the bench, which I may have, but I know for sure I picked up fouls where I wasn't anywhere near the play. But I think they saw, here's the leading scorer, foul, 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 I had to sit down and I was done. And I think that was my first glimpse, as I told that story to other people who understand Kazakhstan. They were like, yeah, of course. Of course that would happen here. And so I learned about corruption, and I realized that we have corruption here in our country, but we hide it a little better, right? Over there, it's out in the open. You have to navigate it constantly, and that's one example. So after the game, we went to the hallway and we looked, and here's the team picture. And I was like, are those the two refs? And they were there, and they were like, yeah, they're in the team picture. Why? Well, they're the owners of the team. So that's just the way it worked in Kazakhstan. I also had a chance to play in Poland. And if you don't know, this is the entrance to Auschwitz. And this experience also changed me. Walking in these halls, seeing the discarded clothes, seeing the gas chamber, seeing where people would sleep, was really also a time where, I think I realized how capable we are as humans of doing great evil. And I think it was important for me to see this because these are people from Northern Europe, similar cultural background to me, and to realize this wasn't the other, this wasn't someone else doing this, but this is something that, is in all of our DNA. And I've since traveled and been to killing fields in Cambodia. I've been to the genocide sites in Rwanda, been to Bosnia, been places in Guatemala where the indigenous populations have been just brutalized. And I realized this is a humanity thing. And I think this is where I started realizing just some of the challenges of what we face. After this trip, I went to Indonesia. And this probably isn't what you think of when you think of Indonesia. This is a private school, very wealthy as you can see. I don't know if you guys have private schools like this out here, but these don't exist where I live. And if you go literally a mile from this school, you have incredibly impoverished third world populations. And so I was invited to come to this school to put on a basketball clinic. And so we would go to the outside villages to promote the game. And I remember going to schools with hundreds of kids who were so excited to learn to play basketball. And we'd go to the courtyard area, and it'd be a dirt area with like a hoop on a wall. Maybe the wall was like right next to another wall. So the kids, and the hoop was oftentimes like 11 feet tall. And the kids wanted to play so bad, but they just didn't have space. And I think that was when it kind of sunk in that, wow, this is something that kids struggle with around the world is access of where to play. So fast forward, I'm done playing basketball. I'm working for another nonprofit where I'm mentoring high school athletes, coaches, and I really wanted to get them out of the country. It's like, I just think everyone, if they have the chance to experience another country, another culture, can really benefit from that. So I had this in my mind, but I didn't know. I was looking for organizations. Who do I go through? I couldn't find any that really fit. So I ended up getting an email from the Philippines one day, and they asked if I knew of a basketball team that wanted to go play in the Philippines. I did it, and I think I was telling some people today, I think that email went to 500 people. It's now an email that I would certainly send to my junk mail and just delete right away. For some reason, I responded to that email and said, no, I don't have a basketball team, but what about the need for a basketball court? Is there a need for that? And didn't expect to hear anything. In fact, I think I forgot that I even sent that email. When I woke up the next morning to 3 emails in my inbox saying, are you serious? Like, we have this piece of land, we're trying to do this, would you really help us? And at that time, I felt like I was already committed, so I was like, yes. Not knowing how we were gonna do it or anything, but yes, we're gonna do it. So I got like 24 high school students and adults, and this was the site. This field is the site that the community had in mind to build this first court project. And we went down there and had an amazing experience and ended up doing this project together with the community. Had a huge tournament afterwards, went fantastic. And I thought, that's a cool life experience. check that off the list. I'll never do that again, but what a fun thing to do. Within literally 2 months, someone in Costa Rica reached out to me, someone in Honduras reached out to me, and then someone in that community in Indonesia reached out to me with the exact same stories. We also have a piece of land. We're trying to do this. Would you consider helping us? And so then that next year, I had a hard time saying no, and I said yes, we'll do it. And so we recruited 3 teams at that point and had an incredible year of doing 3 projects, and the needs kept coming to us. It kept coming to us. And so at that point, we had a 6-month-old baby, and I told my wife that I think I want to leave my secure job and start a nonprofit. And this is 2007, right before the market collapsed. And I want to go out on my own, leave health benefits, And she looked at me like I was crazy, but it says a lot about her that she ended up coming around and fully supporting it. She came on staff 3 years later, and it's been our thing that we've done now since 2007. And she, so basically I went into it not sure where it was going to lead, what was going to happen. And now we've been doing it for 11 years, and we've done, I think, 192 projects. We did 30 last year. So it's continued to grow, but I feel like the heart of what we do has stayed consistent. So I want to talk quickly about why we do what we do, because I think it'll be helpful for you guys. And to do that, I'm going to introduce you guys to a TED Talk that I think summarizes kind of the heart of what we do. So here it is.
Everything I do and everything I do professionally, my life has been shaped by 7 years of work as a young man in Africa. From 1971 to 1977, I look young, but I'm not. I worked in Zambia, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Algeria, Somalia, in projects of technical cooperation with African countries. I worked for an Italian NGO, and every single project that we set up in Africa failed. And I was distraught. I thought, age 21, that we Italians were good people and we were doing good work in Africa. Instead, everything we touched, we killed. Our first project, the one that has inspired my first book, Ripples from the Zambezi, was a project where we Italians decided to teach Zambian people how to grow food. So we arrived there with Italian seeds in southern Zambia, in this absolutely magnificent valley, going down to the Zambezi River, and we taught the local people how to grow Italian tomatoes and zucchini. And of course, the local people had absolutely no interest in doing that, so we paid them to come and work, and sometimes they would show up. And we were amazed that the local people in such fertile valley would not have any agriculture. But instead of asking them how come they were not growing anything, we simply said, thank God we're here. Just in the nick of time to save the Zambian people from starvation. And of course, everything in Africa grew beautifully, and we had these magnificent tomatoes. In Italy, a tomato would grow to this size, in Zambia to this size. And we could not believe. And we were telling the Zambians, look how easy agriculture is. When the tomatoes were nice and ripe and red, overnight, some 200 hippos came out from the river and they ate everything. And we said to the Zambians, my God, the hippos! And the Zambia said, yes, that's why we have no agriculture here. Why didn't you tell us? You never asked. I thought it was only us Italians blundering around Africa, but then I saw what the Americans were doing, what the English were doing, what the French were doing, and after seeing what they were doing, I became quite proud of our project in Zambia, because you see, at least we fed the hippos. You should see the rubbish. You should see the rubbish that we have bestowed on unsuspecting African people. You want to read the book? Read Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo, Zambian woman economist. The book was published in 2009. We, Western donor country, have given the African continent $2 trillion American in the last 50 years. I'm not going to tell you the damage that the money has done. Just go and read her book. Read it from an African woman, the damage that we have done. We Western people are imperialist, colonialist missionaries. And there are only two ways we deal with people. We either patronize them or we are paternalistic. The two words come from the Latin root pater, which means father, but they mean two different things. Paternalistic, I treat anybody from a different culture as if they were my children. I love you so much. Patronizing, I treat everybody from another culture as if they were my servants. That's why the white people in Africa are called Wana, boss. I was given a slap in the face reading a book, Small is Beautiful, written by Schumacher, who said, above all in economic development, if people do not wish to be helped, leave them alone. This should be the first principle of aid. The first principle of aid is respect. This morning,
All right, so I think he says it better than I could in terms of just summarizing just some of the things that we would avoid when we think about doing projects like what we do. So we try to be very careful about how we operate. And so we have some core values. The first one is this. It's that we rely on genuine partnerships. So I took this picture in Guatemala. These women are shoveling into the bucket, as you can see. It looks like these women are watching and observing, but they're not. As soon as the bucket's full, they're one on each side of it. They're sprinting it to the cement mixer. They're dumping it in. They're running back. They're setting it down. And you see they're wearing nice clothes. And for me, I took this picture, and it's like if the women in the community are making that kind of sacrifice to make this happen, then surely it's significant, it's meaningful. And so for us, like I talked about, the communities are the ones who reach out to us, kind of like they did initially. So here's some of the things they typically do. They apply. They're the ones who determine the court location, the size of the court, even the sports to be played. Basketball is my thing, but we build courts that don't even have basketball. Basketball, volleyball, soccer, badminton. The communities are the ones who determine what sports are going to be played. They resolve land issues. They're the ones who get bids. They actually also help fundraise for their own courts. So they're actively doing fundraising events. They're reaching out to politicians. They're trying to get things donated. They're reaching out to companies. They're fundraising. I put that they prepare for a high maintenance U.S. group, which is kind of true. Because we're coming to their community and we're scared and we don't know what it's like to live like they like, and so, but they're ready to host us. They also prepare the land, which means they excavate it, sometimes by hand, sometimes they build the retaining walls, putting a compact layer down, forms, all this stuff. They have a heavy workload, and we had about 40 to 50 communities apply to us last year that said, we want to do this, because that's how important it is for us to have a place for our kids to play sports, that we want to go through all of these steps to make that happen. And for us, that may sound like, well, why don't you just do it for them? Why don't you just do it for them? But the fact that they have ownership and they're empowered through the process is so important for us. We want them at the end of the project to say, look what we did as a community with the help of this U.S. group, rather than look what this group did for us. We're so grateful for them. Huge difference for us. And so that's what we try to be all about. And this is what I show to our groups before they travel. And I asked them this question, like, what are some advantages to having this approach of doing everything in partnership versus us just coming in and doing it all for them? And the advantages are, it empowers the community, these things I'm talking about, it's long-term, it's sustainable. Some of the disadvantages, I want the students to realize that, is that when you're partnering with people from a different culture on a construction project, it can be messy. There's details that you have to work through, cultural issues. But for us, that's kind of the beauty of it. Like, that's the learning experience. That's how you actually engage with another culture as you're trying to do this together. We want to provide a transformational experience expanding worldview, fostering cross-cultural understanding, inspiring servant leadership. But from my perspective, transformational experiences require sacrifice. So for the groups that travel with us, we actually, and I'll go back, we're 100% immersed into these communities. So we're not staying in a nice hotel and busing in and doing a little bit of service. Like, we are fully living in these communities for a week. So what that means is we're either doing homestays, we're sleeping on the floor in a school or a church, we're eating the local food, we're probably taking bucket baths with cold water. We're living like they live in these rural parts of Latin America and Africa and Southeast Asia where we go. And that's important to us because what it does is it moves you from a place of pity. So I think when you just touch foot in a community and see how they live, you feel pity for them. And then you leave, and that's all you're left with. When you live with people for a week, you start to see their strengths, their resilience. You start to see how resourceful they are. You start to see them for being much more than people to be pitied. And so that's for us why we stay in the community. And it does require sacrifice. You disconnect. We actually have a no cell phone policy on our trips, which shocks people, and they can't believe it at first. But we just had a group from SMU go on a trip, and the students afterwards, I was on the trip, said to me, whatever you do, don't change the cell phone policy. Because that was one of the highlights of the trip, was to just be totally disconnected, to relate to each other, to relate to the community. We ask our groups to do challenging manual labor. And what that does is it earns the respect of the community. You level the playing field. We're not better than you. We're working side by side. We're shoveling with you. We're carrying buckets with you. And we're adopting the position of a learner. So many times you go to these trips and you're always the one teaching. But in this case, chances are they did way more manual labor than you've done in your life, especially with the tools that they're using. So you're in a position of learning, and then later in the trip you can be in the position of teacher. I talk about living in primitive conditions. It develops an equal status relationship, gain a true understanding. So I took this picture because we were at Iguazu Falls, one of the wonders of the world, and I saw a guy wait in his line and go all the way around and come all the way back, never one time putting his phone down. He videoed the whole thing, turned around and saw the whole experience just through his screen. He didn't even put it down to soak in the beauty. So for me, that's kind of what our trips are. It's like putting that down, putting those barriers down, and actually soaking it in. Because what it's ultimately about is relationships. This was a high school student with a host mom that totally bonded through this experience. And that's what it's all about, even beyond the courts. Life's about relationships, and the fact that you're building strong connections, relationships with people in a whole different culture is really, really powerful. Exceptional character is one of our values. This is a high school senior carrying a 100-pound bag of cement. And you can see this Guatemalan man is looking at her in disbelief. Is this really happening? And so what this communicates to people compared to that, which unfortunately is the way that people that look like me have come into countries, in the past, is completely different. And that's what we try to be about. So those are some of our values, and along with that is what we believe is the power of sport around the world. And this kind of ties into the college here. I've been to almost every corner of the world. I've been to a lot of places, a lot of very poor places. I have never been to a place, and I don't think a place exists where kids aren't playing sports. I don't think it exists. And if they don't have access to sports like you and I think of access to sports, they're going to make their own little nook and cranny, and they're going to find a way, because it's innate in kids to play. So coinciding with the year that we did our project in the Philippines, 2006, the United Nations actually declared it the year of sport and physical education. And they did some research about what makes sports powerful, especially around the world. And I'm going to highlight a few things quickly here. So the first one, this is the first one. That physical activity and play are essential not only for physical development, but also your brain development, psychological, social development. And like I said before, kids will find access. You see these a lot in the developing world. Homemade balls, twine, burlap sacks, garbage, whatever it takes to create their own balls. So there's something about sports that's innate, like I said. But it goes beyond that. So sports can provide inclusion for marginalized groups. So these girls are from a tribe called the Mamanwa tribe in the Philippines, in Mindanao. And this, in the Philippines, I highlighted it initially, but basketball is the thing in the Philippines. It's probably one of only 3 or 4 countries in the world where basketball is the most popular sport, bar none. So if you go to the Philippines, no matter who you are and you're an American, you're gonna play a basketball game. Like they're gonna get you in a basketball game somehow, because it's that important. So the Mamanwa tribe, traditional hunter-gatherers, nomadic people that eventually had to settle down into communities, highly discriminated against in the Philippines. I was giving a presentation, I showed the slide, and a Filipino guy came up to me afterwards, and he was like, "You're underselling this. Like, they're subhuman in our culture. Like, we don't even call them by name. We call them a derogatory name. They're less than human." So we basically found out that there's all these basketball tournaments, like I said. Communities will play against communities. And they were always excluded from playing those tournaments. Never invited to play. So one time, after petitioning the local government, they were forced to be allowed to play in this tournament. And they ended up winning the tournament. Now keep in mind, their court that they had to play on was like a dirt court, a couple palm trees with a rim attached to it. And that's where they played, and that's where they practiced. They won this tournament, which to us sounds like, who cares? You know, like that's not a big deal. For them, it was such a big deal that they had a parade for this team in their community, and they marched them around on their shoulders. And the surrounding community started calling them the Mamanwa NBA, which was significant, obviously because of the NBA, but also they were calling them by their actual name, the Mamanwa NBA. And so it was a source of pride. So they partnered with us to build an actual court that now has become the nicest court in the whole area. And so all the surrounding communities want to come and play on their court. And it literally, sports, basketball, this whole experience has raised their whole status in their whole surrounding area, where now they have something of value that everyone wants a part of, which I think is really cool, and it's an example of how this can work. The next one is talking about control over your body. So we met this guy in Rwanda, and he survived the genocide, but he was hiding literally in the forest, in the bush. Came out after the genocide was over, stepped on a landmine, took off his leg. And an unlikely sport that we would think of, but he took up cycling. He does not have a prosthetic leg. And we watched him. He's become one of the top 40 cyclists in all of Rwanda. And he's incredible. And the reason I have this slide is because the fact that he, through sports, is not begging in the street, but is actually sponsored as a Rwandan cyclist. You see the hope when he talks about it and what sports has done in his life is incredible. And so we've seen this in places where we've gone in trauma areas, and especially they talk about people with disabilities, conflict areas, trauma, but also girls and women. And most of the courts we build, really one of the big benefits is for the girls. Because in a lot of communities, there's always a dominant sport. In Latin America, what's the dominant sport? Soccer. In the Dominican Republic, what's the dominant sport? Baseball. You guys are good. So those are the dominant sports, and the girls try to play, and they're kicked off. They don't let them play. So when you introduce new sports like basketball and volleyball, it's actually a chance. And you guys have probably seen the studies that talk about girls who grow up playing sports and what that does for first pregnancy, and just having that sense that I control my body. And we've seen it over and over again. I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but this is a school in Indonesia that I was talking about that kind of helped inspire me. But it talks about how sports can bring together people from very different backgrounds. So the people in this school are primarily Muslim. They're ethnic Indonesian, meaning their families have lived there forever, and they're very poor. That school is made up of obviously very wealthy. They live in gated communities on golf courses. They're primarily Christian. They're primarily Chinese Indonesian. So you kind of have the perfect storm of ethnic, religious, socioeconomic, and there's been a lot of conflict. So we did these projects in conjunction with a league that was bringing both of those kids to play sports together on the same field, on the same teams, which I think sports is one of the very few things that can actually accomplish something like that. These kids from the wealthier school had zero idea that this community even existed. They lived a mile from them their whole lives, but they lived such secluded lives, they had no idea it existed. So that's something sports can do. This was like the second court we ever built in Costa Rica, and this, when you leave, it's similar to this, and then they put the paint on it later, you know, and pretty it up a little bit, but this is a simple concrete slab. But as soon as this court was built, there's a school up on the hill. They're able to rent out their court to traveling 3-on-3 soccer teams and adult leagues and generate income for their school. So a lot of times we see that. Schools sometimes will build a court and they'll build like a restaurant next to it. So when they have tournaments and gatherings, they can actually sell food and make money, which is really cool. And our projects are often more than just about sports. So this was in Peru. This is the center of their community. There's a school right here, a little market, the Catholic church, and they would always host gatherings. So in Latin American communities, a lot of times, especially when you celebrate the patron saint of that community, people will come from miles and miles and miles to this community. You can see what it looked like before. So they finally had a place where people could come and it wasn't mud. And so they started putting these holes in the concrete, and I'd never seen this before. Like, why are we putting holes? Like, they put probably like 8 or 9 holes in the concrete, and I couldn't figure it out, and finally I got the answer. It wasn't volleyball poles, it wasn't for tents, it was for fireworks. They wanted a place to be able to put the poles in the ground and launch fireworks, because when they did celebrations, they wanted to do it right. And I thought that was so cool that it shows like how multifunctioning and multi-purpose the courts are. So here's some of the places that we've gone. You know, kind of all over. I think, like I said, 30 countries now. We did a project in Samoa that's not on here, but the rest you can see. We've been all over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share now just kind of the top 6 things I've learned in the last 12 years, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So the first thing I've learned is to not be afraid. We live in a culture of incredible fear. This happened a couple years ago. I know the coronavirus is now rightfully scaring, people. The Zika virus a couple years ago. And we live in a culture where, although it's safer statistically to travel, you hear more bad stories that people are afraid to travel. And the ironic thing about it is, just as we're getting more afraid to travel to other countries are getting more afraid to travel here. Amnesty International had a travel advisory for people to come to the U.S. because of our mass shootings. And so parents will be freaked out about sending their kids, and I'm like, well, here people are freaked out about sending their kids here. What would you tell them? And so you have to get over this fear. We have taken risks, calculated risks, and I'm telling you, it's always paid off for us. This is in the West Bank. We did a trip. It wasn't a Courts for Kids project. And we decided we were going to stay in the West Bank instead of in Jerusalem. And so we got a taxi from the airport. It dropped us off at the gate. And we walked, through the checkpoints, dumped us out into Palestine, in Bethlehem. And there was a group of people outside cooking, music playing. And there's part of me that's like, what are we doing? Like, what do we get ourselves into, knowing that, we as the U.S. government fund 50% of the Israeli military. And so they asked right away, what country are you from? And I was kind of thinking, do I say Canada? Do I say Australia? But we were like, no, we're from America. And immediately they all said, oh, we love Americans. And they welcomed us. And from that point on, we felt incredibly, incredibly welcome in the West Bank, which scares people. They don't want to go there. But I've never, ever been to a place where if you have a human-to-human connection with people, that you realize you have so much in common. So that's my first thing, is don't let all the crazy news scare you away from having travel experiences. Let people speak for themselves. Too often we try to speak for people. And I give this example, which I know Judy's group was in northern Uganda. I don't know if you know who this is. This is Joseph Kony, who was the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. Did any of you guys ever, and this happened a while ago, see the documentary Invisible Children? Anyone see that? A few of you did. So it's super popular in 2006. I think I wrote it down here. By 2009, 5 million people had watched this documentary. And what it was about Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, and how they were basically taking child soldiers, abducting them at a young age, 8, 9, 10. Our friend Sam, we both know, was abducted when he was young and basically was let out. That's just crazy, horrific stories. And these 3 film students from USC filmed this documentary that's very compelling. And they mobilize people to give all sorts of money to this cause. Well, when they raised this money and they gave it to the Ugandan military, a lot of it, and when you go talk to people in northern Uganda, they were like, we like the fact that they made a video, but they're giving money to the military, and for them it was a very complicated issue because they didn't trust the military almost as much as they didn't trust Coney. I'm not going to get all the reasons of it why, but I just want to say they made a second movie, and basically it was received so poorly in northern Uganda that they had a showing in Lira where they went, and they were chucking tomatoes at the screen. They were so mad that they told the story the way they did. So what I've learned through that, we used to have a curriculum. We go into a community and we say, okay, we're going to learn this, this, and this. You're going to get this, this, and this out of it. And we've come to say, no, we're going to let the community speak for themselves. Tell us, their reality. We're going to soak that in. We're going to learn about it. We're going to grow through that process. Let them speak for themselves. The world is full of paradoxes, and you have to be comfortable, what I've learned, to live in the gray. So I think this is a good illustration of it. We all have our own vision of what our reality is, and it's complicated. So for example, there's a lot of people in the developing world that are trying to start businesses. They're entrepreneurs, and they have to wait 7 years to get the government approval. It's so highly bureaucratic. Try telling these people that what they need is more government regulation. Like, they want more free market, okay? Likewise, I was just in Norway this summer. Go tell Norwegians that them having state-run healthcare hurts their freedom. They'll tell you the opposite. Like, we have our own perceptions depending upon where we're at, and we tend to clump everything into black and white. And I'm telling you, as I've traveled, what I've realized is that we live in a gray world a lot of times. Which America are we? The best country on earth, or are we this image? And I think what I've come to realize is we're actually both in some ways. Like, if you read our history of what we've done in Latin America, the CIA, a lot of stuff, we've done some really, really nasty things around the world. We've done some incredible things around the world too. And when you go listen to people hear their stories, that's their view of America is mixed, and that's what it is. I like this quote by Anthony Bourdain. It seems that the more places I go and experience, the bigger I realize the world to be. The more I become aware of, the more I realize how little I know of it. Many places I still have to go, more to learn. Maybe that's enlightenment enough. So there's no final resting place of the mind, no smug clarity. Wisdom is realizing how small I am, and unwise and how far I have yet to go. I can relate to that. I've learned that projecting evil onto people is not a good idea. This is like so deep in our DNA to scapegoat groups of people, and it never goes well. It never ends well. This last project in Morocco, probably the biggest takeaway was the impact that this group from Texas had going to a Muslim country during Ramadan and realizing their vision or version of Islam that they kind of understood their whole lives was actually not matching the reality on the ground. This is a great quote, that the line between good and evil doesn't pass through states, classes, political parties, but right through every human heart. It shifts, it's inside of us. And so I just have come to realize that the evil that I see in the world, I'm capable of myself. The good I see in the world, I'm capable of myself. We all need to do our internal work. And I think part of that is traveling and understanding other cultures. This is a quote that we usually end our training on that I love. We have cultural blind spots. When I'm immersed to another cultural tradition and community, do I become actually aware of my own blind spots? My imagination is stretched, which is what our projects are trying to do. As I'm forced to rethink my own in the light of another way of life, I come to cherish what is good. And the big thing for our trip, you're going to come back and you're going to say, I'm so thankful for some things that I have. But if our trips are successful at all, you will also challenge what is bad or ugly and realize how much we have to grow. Okay, the last story I want to share is how our world is shrinking. This girl right here in Nepal, she's one of my favorite all-time people in communities because she was there every day. She was like the most dedicated worker. And she had never played basketball before this project, but she was there every day building the sport. When we showed up to do the clinic, I show up, And she is out on the court, going full speed, shooting layups off the correct foot, which might not sound like much for you guys, but I've traveled and I've helped people play basketball, and being able to jump off the left foot, shoot with the right hand, is not easy for people that have like played soccer or their whole life. But for her, she was killing it. She was dribbling down, and so I said to our translator, you have to ask her, who taught you how to play basketball? I have to know. And she basically said, no one taught me. Ever since I found out we were getting the court, I've been on YouTube, and I've been teaching myself how to play basketball. And she did. She was amazing. So I pulled her aside, and we did like a 20-minute clinic with her. The trip I was on before that was in Nepal. We were in this remote community in Nepal. We had dinner with a family on a dirt floor, and they had literally buffalo lived in the same room of where we were eating. Very primitive community. And this is a science teacher, and he pulled me aside and he said, I'm so excited for the basketball court. I want to help teach the kids how to play. And he pulled up his phone and he said, I've been teaching myself how to play basketball. And he showed me the video he was watching, and it was the all-time best NBA crossover dribbles. Hilarious to watch and get so excited about Allen Iverson crossing people up. So the world's shrinking. The world's shrinking in some ways, and it's awesome to see. And I'll end with this, that when we were in college, my wife and I actually made the decision financially we were going to give 10% of our money to causes we believed in. And I was making like $450 on my scholarship check. Didn't even turn on my heat because I didn't want to pay the heat bill. I didn't have money for it. But we kind of were like, from that point on, that we're going to make a commitment to give. And I will say that's probably the best decision that I've ever made in my life. We were in Rwanda one time, and there was a person talking to Rwanda that said they were collecting money for people in Burundi, which is a poorer country than Rwanda. And he was like, if all we do is receive, and we never give, basically our soul is going to atrophy. Like, giving is fundamental to who we are as people. And I've realized that we all have things to give, we all can give, and if there's something about it that is necessary for our soul. So wherever you're at in life, whatever condition you're in, you can give something. And I've just found that the best people I've ever met in this world are people who just have this generous spirit. And they've encouraged me and inspired me in so many ways. So I'm going to end with this quote, and then I'll open it up to questions. This is also Anthony Bourdain. If you're 22, physically fit, hungry to learn and be better, I urge you to travel as far and widely as possible. Sleep on floors. Find out how other people live and eat and cook. Learn from them wherever you go. That's kind of the spirit of what we do, and hopefully you guys gather that and can take it and apply it to your lives. That's all I've got.